How's it going, everybody? Gunnar here, and today is all about tying the chosen one dropper jig style. So check it out. So the way this tutorial is going to function for this one, this is actually the finished fly, and I want to show you guys how to install a dropper jig system, talk about it real quick. And it is an updated video from the previous one. This one's actually lower profile and easier to stack multiple beads and also create a rattle effect and whatnot. So check this one out even if you've watched the old dropper jig video. Aside from that, I do have kits available on the website for not only this color combo, which is the natural perch being yellow, green, and a nice kind of medium brown bronzy color, but a really cool kind of natural perch color combo. But aside from that, I also have the dropper jig kit, which is going to run you on the Arex TP, what is this, a 370, 60-degree bent and a 2-aught. You're going to get 2 packs of tungsten beads. These are 5 32nd inch, which is kind of what I like to use. You get, I do 2 on a hook most of the time, and we'll get to the weighting and how much and whatnot. But 2 is kind of a really nice subtle jig for me, and I really like fishing 2 beads a hook. So you get 2 packs of those to cover it, and then some mono. And this is 28 thousandths of an inch diameter. You can also use about 24 thousandths of an inch, but anything in that range, it'll run you like maybe 40 pound to 60 pound monofilament is going to be really applicable for kind of the updated version. So you get all that in kind of a kit. So let's dive into the dropper jig. So the dropper jig system is really quite simple. We're going to take some monofilament, we're going to tie it to the bend of the jig hook, and we're going to extend it down and put our weight on this extension. Now I'm going to refer to this as a lever arm because functionally it is creating an increased moment force by displacing the weight farther off the hook axis, if that makes sense. And so what you have to understand is I like to run 2 beads. That's just kind of what I like, and I like to run it, you'll see when I put the distance, but maybe an inch or so, and that'll keel this 2-aught picture perfectly. But if I wanted to tie it lighter weight, if I wanted a very subtle jig, more suspending, I could use a longer mowing arm and just put a single bead on there. The longer the arm, the more leverage I have, so I can use less weight. If I want to do 3 beads or 4 beads and make a really heavy fly that'll get down, well, I can use a nice short arm and they'll keel it just fine. So you use the length of the arm relative to the amount of weight. And what's really nice is because it's all tied on at the end of the fly to the bend of this little streamer hook, I can tie whatever fly I want. So this is not just applicable to the chosen one. You can literally tie anything. Bucktail deceivers, bulkheads, and what a Murdics, minnows, it doesn't matter. You can tie whatever you want and simply invert it. And not only that, but you can adjust the weight based on the lever arm. Now at the end of this video, I didn't have enough fall fishing clips to make a full video dedicated to the dropper jig. But I got some good examples of how I like to use it. So I'm going to talk about that at the end. So after we run through this tutorial, make sure you watch the fishing clips and get a good idea of how I like to fish it, because I think it might surprise you in terms of versatility. So I'm going to jump in here and dropper jig this sucker. It's going to be a verb. I'm going to dropper jig it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and take off, you know, a working section of mono. It doesn't have to be long, but the longer it is, the easier it is to work with here. And I'm going to take my 2 tag ends, and I'm going to tie an overhand knot in my tag end. So I just looped it, and I'm going to tie an overhand knot. Really seal that knot. Come and cut your tag ends off. So I just have a knot, an overhand knot, and no tag end. And then what you want to do is you want to super glue that. And when you super glue your monofilament, this stuff will basically like weld together, and that knot is never coming undone no matter what you do to it. So I put a fairly liberal amount of Zap-A-Gap brushable CA+ right to that overhand knot, and that thing is staying for a lifetime. You can come and cut that off. Now that knot, the reason why I mentioned the diameter of my line is that knot is thick enough that it's going to stop my beads, and with that super glue the knot's never coming undone. And so I can take my 5 32nd inch beads and I can stack them, just 1, 2, 3, and now I have this nice low profile cord, so I can stack as many as I want or as few as I want, And you can use a small bead to beat up against your knot, and then you can use any size bead, as large as you want, if you want to be heavier or lighter, or really fine tune it outside of the 5/32 range that I am kind of drawn to. So I'm going to open this up while that dries. Just touching that super glue and making sure that super glue is set on there. And then I'm going to take my beads, and I'm going to run them, doesn't matter which orientation, but they'll slide right down that 28 thousandths of an inch. It's perfect for the inside diameter of your beads here. And now I have two beads that just butt up right in my knot here, and they can slide up and down on this mono no problem. If you use thinner mono, they'll obviously be freer. If you use a little bit thicker, they'll be a little bit snug, but you could probably even go a little thicker than the 28 thousandths if you needed to. Now this mono, you can see it kind of has some memory to it. If I just hold it, it's kind of arcing out of frame, right? It's kind of, this is kind of hard with my right hand, but it's kind of arcing forward like that. And I want to use that to my advantage so that when I tie this down, it's going to relax either straight down, and I'm even going to kink it a little forward the way I tie this in so that my fly is balanced with the weight forward. I want it to still drop head first a little bit. If you tie it in, let's say like this, you're going to get a really weird action where the fly kind of like sinks back first or at a weird kind of angle. But I like to balance it so that's fitted up front. So I'll just come in with my 210 Flymaster Plus. And this, it hasn't been a full 24 hours. You're going to hear me reference that at the end of this video when I'm done tying this. My silicone is like set up. It's not fully cured yet. It's only been on here for about 3 or 4 hours, so still a little soft. It's still a little milky. That'll get clear as time goes on, but for right now it's good enough that I can finish the fly. I'm going to come and catch this with my thread here, snug that up into place, and that distance right there, it's about 1 inch or so, is going to be perfect for my 2 beads to keel that fly. Now I'm going to come and, normally I would rotate my vise, but I want to keep it in the camera frame. I'm going to put some serious thread down just so that's locked into place, and I can come and cut those butts off so my hook eye's open. Now I'm going to come and I'm basically going to parachute wrap my thread here. And every time I go around, you can bring your thread up, going to bring it under, parachute it again, bring it up, bring it under. I want to make sure. It's hard to do and see if it's in frame here. But I'm wrapping my thread literally around that mono, and I'm trying to get that nice forward angle to it, really pulling it forward. Put some thread behind that sucker so that I can control the angle of that. That right there is going to be about perfect. So now I'm going to come up here, throw a 1/2 hitch in, throw a whip finish in, make sure that it's perfectly in line, so that's perfectly vertical. You don't have it kinked off to one side or front to back. And then just to hide that, I'm going to hit that with my chart pack marker here. Hide all my white thread up in there. And that is how to apply a low profile dropper jig system. And you can obviously add beads. Just do 3 beads, 1 bead, 2 bead, 4 bead for however heavy you want it. So that right there is the updated low profile stackable bead option for the dropper jig system. And it's the coolest thing to me is the fact that that hook shank is the same, and you can really put any pattern on it whatsoever and invert it. And I just think that's absolutely phenomenal. So stick through this if you want. I'm going to run through the full tutorial for this fly. This is a jerk head silicone option of my chosen one in natural perch, and then at the end we'll talk about some fishing stuff. Check it out. Alright, so I'm coming in with my 210 Flymaster Plus. I'm going to leave a decent amount of room for the head because I'm going to put a jerk head on this version. So I need a full, this is, what is this, a 1/4 inch eye. So I need a full 1/4 inch to cut my head flush so that eye is really, really well supported. So I'm going to start just a little ways back, about a third down the hook. Of course I need tying scissors. I'm going to run back here, kind of right between my hook point and my barb. I'm going to start building a little thread bump back here. 3 minutes trying to get the perfect bump, but the truth is it doesn't matter. You just need something to give that squimpish hair some lift. And then I'm going to come in and hit this with some Zap-A-Gap real quick. Now this 2-aught jig hook is a wee bit bigger than your 1-aught TP610. So I'm going to use a little bit more hair here and stack it a little bit longer than normal. Build about a 5-inch, maybe a 4.5 inch, but a 5-inch fly, thereabouts. So I'm going to stack it per usual. I'm going to come up and pinch my tips, draw out my shorter fibers, draw out my shorter fibers again, and stack these, intentionally stack these so the tips are not all the same level, right? You want to maintain that taper, and that's going to preserve your action. And then again, I'm going to make that a little bit longer here. And just a reminder, because this is all uniform diameter material, I can take, this was my waste that I was going to throw away, I can put some taper into that and add that to my bundle. That's going to help your squimpish hair last as long as possible from the kits here. I'm going to come in with my medium brown wing and flash. I'm going to make this one flashy. Cut that in half. And with these two separated just like that, I'm going to kind of veil that wing and flash out and around those fibers and get flash all the way throughout my fly. Come and measure that off. I got some wing and flash going crazy back there. It's really nice if you leave a little bit of the wing and flash just past the tips because it moves so good in the water. It's ridiculous. Gonna come and cut that nice and flush. Using my thumbnail, push right on top of my thread. And looking at the butt ends here, I'm gonna make sure I got a nice even distribution. Really cinch that down, walk the butts back to your thread ramp. You can see that starting to flare. And then try to push this over itself so that all the fibers, you know, you want the fibers to fold back. You don't want the fibers to crisscross or come to the sides. You want them to be straight over themselves. Draw it down and around your thread there. And you bring your thread up on top. Pinch and pull so that you're making sure everything's perfectly distributed. Put down a thread base, but don't collapse your little ramp that you made. Then bring your thread up. Now this bundle is going to be hollow tied right here, so I just want to measure this off. You want them to have a slight taper, but you're not looking to truly do the rule of halves, because you gotta, well, not because you gotta, but because you have so much fiber variance in there. Stack that right on top. Get my loose thread on there. Distribute that around. And now before I just seal the deal here, add some thread pressure. Really pinch and pull this stuff kind of top and bottom and get it displaced. You can see how much wider that is there. And then lock your butts down. And then normally I would super glue that. Actually, I am going to super glue that. Not worried about saving time here. I'm going to fish this thing for pike, so hold on a sec. But you can throw super glue on level thread. Make sure your thread is level. In case you get a big bunch on there, you don't want it running down into your bobbin. That'd be bad news. That's going to help seal and protect those threads a little bit. Then when I go and invert this and flip this all backwards, really make sure you're pulling that high and tight, top and bottom, right? I'm trying to emphasize that silhouette profile here of the jerk flies. Really work that material back. And then when you come in with your fingers to hold this back, instead of coming in with like a bulkhead pinch and a round pinch, you can really just pinch it high and tight, 2 fingers, keep it vertically displaced here, and then put a nice small little thread bump up here to force all that fiber back. Pull little fibers down onto my sides here, some make sure I have my veil. Need a little bit more thread up on there. Because I'm making a slightly longer fly, I'm using slightly more material so that it's denser, right? Because you're using denser material, you need a slightly more aggressive thread bump to really control that. Now don't forget, this is jig hook. So this is technically how your fly is supposed to be oriented. This is your top bottom right here. So I'm going to come and put my peacock curl on top. And what you can do is you can truly just put it off. If you can see that, it's all on the same side of my hook here. Right, it's all on just one side of the hook. And when you bring your thread up, your thread is going to pull those bass up to the dead center top. Lock it in place, and then take the tips of your scissors and draw half the fibers over. Make sure the point of your scissors is closed all the way, or that'll happen to you. They'll catch on some fibers in there. And then you can drag that side to side. And that's how you can just work around your hook point right there. My scissors, my hook point, or the points of my scissors did a number right there on some wing and flash, dragging that over. But make sure you pinch that nice and high and tight. I don't want that to veil too much. But really keep that nice and vertical there. Now I'm going to come and put down my thread base for my dubbing loop. I'm going to try to bridge the gap up here and smooth some of this out so I can get my dubbing loop way up to where my peacock's tied in and really use that full area. And I'm going to try to finish the fly off still on the flat section. You don't want to go up into that bend at all. So for my dubbing loop, I'm going to spin my thread clockwise so it's all corded up for strength. I'm going to make about a 5-inch loop here. Really tie that down so it's not slipping or going anywhere on you. Throw a 1/2 inch in here so your thread doesn't move, and I'm going to clip all this out of the way for me so nothing gets caught in my loop. Don't forget the dubbing wax, it's pretty helpful. Now the bigger the flies get, the more you're going to want to put a decent amount of squimpish here into your collar, because it'll add some really nice bulking movement to the shoulders of the fly. So I'm going to stack a good fair bit of material in here. And again, I'm going to use my waist. Make sure you use that waist. It'll make this stuff last a lot longer. That's going to give that fly some serious bulk when you put that in that dubbing loop right behind your head. And if you want, I've skipped this in the past because I wanted to make it simpler, but you can take wing and flash, cut that in half, and then fan it out in your hands beforehand, then lay it on top of your squimpish. You simply add flash to the wing in your dubbing loop. So now when I preen this open, preen it way open, try to drop that fiber in there without catching any of that wax. Now I have flash integrated into my squimpish here. Now I'm going to come in with my strung fuzzy fiber, cut it off the hide at full length using about 60-65 strands. Cut it in half and cut it in half again, so it's technically a quarter of the original size. And I like to blend my heads. Again, it's an optional thing, but I think it comes out really cool. So take out a big chunk of wing and flash, cut that in half, and then the way you blend it is by rip stacking. What I mean is I pinch these together really hard, and then just pull out the tips, but then bring the tips right back together. And you just work that flash throughout the material, and every once in a while you rotate your bundle. You just keep ripping and stacking. Every time the goal is to get the tips nearly aligned. It doesn't. You can leave a little taper in there, but you just keep stacking the tips back into place. So I always comb this out after I blend it, so all my fibers are running perfectly straight. You don't want fibers going up and crisscrossing in here making a mess. That'll hurt your ability to spin it. And come and cut it so that I have a long side and a short side. Try to open my loop up here. I had some twist in there. Get my long collar up into my loop and my short head up into my loop. Now I wanted to mention that combing process. So right now, when I go to spin this, all my fibers are perfectly longwise. Like if you can see this on the DSLR, you can see how these fibers are all perfectly straight. They all go straight up and down. I don't have any fibers crisscrossing. And when I go to distribute this, you always want to pull in little bundles and push in little bundles and try to even out your bundles, because if you have fibers crisscrossing up in that loop, it's going to be a pain in the rear end trying to spin this, because everything's going to knot up and lock in place. And one thing you can do is you have to have dubbing wax, and you want to be careful that you don't pull anything out. But you can always like clean out your tips with your bodkin like this. And the curly hairs will stick to it a little bit, so you want to be very, very gentle, or you'll just pull it right out of the loop with friction. But it's a way to kind of clean those out so everything's just perfectly vertically, I guess it's not really vertical, but you know, everything's in a straight line. Pull that towards yourself, start turning it nice and slow under tension. I did have somebody ask if you could overspin a loop, and the truth is I've spun this until I break my thread. I try not to, but that's when I was, you know, teaching myself to use this material in a dubbing loop. That was a fairly common thing where I'd spin, you know, 140 power thread so much that I'd break it. I'd spin, you know, whatever else, 210 Flymaster Plus, flat wax nylon, basically anything except GSP. I've spun it so tight that I've broken my thread. So I don't think you can overspin it. Obviously it depends on your thread maybe, but you can't, don't worry about getting these too tight. Obviously you don't want to break your thread, because that's not a fun experience to have to restart your head. But what I do, and you can see it just happen, and I just unspun my loop real quick, but as I spin this, I'm going to see this physically shrink, like right there. It just shrunk up a little bit. And I know that's not something that's going to translate on camera, but if you do this, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 times, you can really tell when your loop shrinks up just 1/8 of an inch like that. And that to me is the maximum that I can spin it before I risk breaking my thread. That's, I call it the elastic limit, because your thread is slightly elastic. The Flymaster Plus that's in the kits, when you tie with it, you can see it has a little flex and give to it. And when you spin that up and it starts shrinking, well, it's no longer has any elasticity. You've pulled that to as much as you can pull it. And if you keep spinning that loop up, you're going to break your loop. And so I don't think you can overspin the material, but you can hurt your thread. So I'm going to pinch and pull all this really aggressively off to a side here. Get a really nice preened back material that I can work as a hackle here. Have a nice dense strung or squimpish hair collar on here that's going to give me some nice bulk. Really make sure my dubbing loop tool's locked into place there. Gonna walk this around. Gonna get that, man, that's annoying. Get that squimpish hair right up tight to my peacock curl. Now I have a pretty nice long loop here, and I'm gonna really pack this into place. I'm pulling with a lot of pressure. You can see that hook fluxing in my vice jaws all the time. Never giving that any slack. Preening this back nice and hard. Just getting one on top of another in here. Again, I'm trying to keep everything on the flat section of my hook shank. come up, get your thread around that once, twice, pull up and down at the same time so you got plenty of leverage on that. Draw that back and tie that down. Now something you can do when we go to do the dropper jig, you can cheat right here just a little bit. And when you tie this off, use your thread to come out onto that bend a little bit and make a thread bump. It's a little more than I wanted, because I can use this thread bump to help push out my dropper jig to help balance the fly so it's not going straight back. So I like to have a comb that's got two different sizes, because you can use the big bristles to start. They don't grab as much and it's easier to work it. You can switch up to the skinny side with higher density comb and really pick it out clean. But we're going to come and trim this head up real quick. So I'm going to come in with a fresh razor blade. If you want to see how to trim this with scissors, I give you guys an example on the Jerk Fly edition, bare bones Jerk Fly edition. But you can use this jig arm as kind of your reference for up and down. You want to, it'll kind of catch inside this little opening right here, so watch out for that. Draw that back, make a nice flat place to put your eye on here. Draw it down a little bit, draw it up a little bit. Just cut it a little bit at a time and then pull it out away from the head so you can actually see how much collar you got and how much room you got. And look how nice and flat, and look how much surface area I have to actually glue my eyes. That's immensely important to getting eyes to stick, is having a good foundation, right? And I like to pop this out of my hand, I like to pop it out of my vise, put it in my hand. And I'm going to trim from my hook point down to my head here. You can see my hook point's buried right here in my material. Cut from that hook point down, kind of clean up these edges here. And then I really can come and just match it, but clean up that underside. There, I'm quite happy with that. Now, of course, before we go and apply our silicone, I'm going to mark up my fly here with my marker. So I'm going to come in with a black chart pack marker, and I'm just going to very lightly, well, I'll touch my thread wraps real quick. Kind of hide those, but you can just touch the head of this nice and light, bring it up into your squimpish fiber, down your peacock a little bit, just so the top of that fly is not yellowy. And then I've been asked a lot if my flies are airbrushed, and they're not. I just simply take the marker, I'll preen all this back, and I'll just kind of touch up. Well, you can go down, I guess, but draw a line right at your bend. That way you start on the same place down both sides here. And voila, you got a nice barred perch. Darker up top, fade down to the sides, nice counter shaded up in the head area. Now again, when it comes to marking a fly and then applying silicone, that marker will bleed heavily into the silicone. So I'd recommend tying up a second one and let this dry. Right now with this color combo, if my head turned black, I could care less. So for the most part, as long as I use a finger that doesn't have any marker on it, I should be able to keep this fairly good and toned the way it is. But if you want, you can get your hook and your jaws a little bit differently so that you can really work around your hook point. That way you can free up some space up here and you're not so locked in. But I'm going to come in with GE2 Household Silicone and Clear. And you're going to want, I'm going to use my Kodak photo flow solutions on this one. And I guess before I get started, I'm going to take my 1/4 inch eyes here. I'm going to put a crease down the center of my pupils just to help those cup into the face of my fly. And then again, you're going to want a painter's rag or paper towel just so you can clean your fingers off between applications and whatnot and clean your tools off. So I'm going to put a pretty good bead right on my finger here and just work that into the head of my fly, kind of work that around my fly. I'm going to keep everything right in the head. Don't focus on getting into the collar. Really work on smashing that into the head. Gonna take another walk around here. Now that that's all in there, close that up real quick. I just come and draw my collar back and then wipe that off into my collar. Just draw it right back into that strung fuzzy fiber. And you can see it's really important that you use a good amount of room for these silicone heads so that you can control the shape, because once you get into the collar, it's going to do whatever that strung fuzzy fiber was doing before. Now if I have some shoulders in this fly right here in that bulky section, that's fine by me, but you need to be able to use truly a full amount to really cut it back, shape the eyes, get a nice tight low profiled head, because once you get into your collar, the collar's going to do whatever the collar's doing. Draw that back down my head. Now I'm going to come in with my bodkin, load this up with a big dab of glue to put my eye in place. I'm going to come and preen my eyes off my thumb here. Try to keep them right on that flat spot that you made. Just lightly tap that into place on top of that silicone. And it doesn't matter if it seeps out the edge, because when you draw that back on the second coat, it'll just bleed into the second coat, so don't worry about that. Then I'm going to come back in with my silicone and put my second coat on. I like to use my bodkin. You can use your finger and just wipe it on. Right now my tip's a little bit of a mess. I'm just going to come and wipe my tip off clean here. But I'll take a good amount to cover my eye with, a good amount to cover my belly with. I'm going to put another one on my belly here, closer to this eye. A fair amount to cover that eye. I like the bodkin because I can just kind of work it and get it distributed without getting my finger all sticky. This eye needs a little bit more, I think. So then I can work that around the hook and just make sure it's even. And all I care about is even. To me it doesn't matter how far back into the head this goes. I'm just trying to coat the eyes here and really make a seamless head that's going to be nice and smooth and really, really, really low friction. I'm going to seal up my silicone here. I use just a little basin and I'll put some photo flow in there, but you can also just get your finger wet. I have it here in a little basin. I'm going to get my finger nice and wet. You can see it's just dripping with photo flow, and that allows me to just smash this into place. Now I had a lot of comments on my last silicone video about using like soap. I think it was like just dish soap and diluting it to make a solution, thanks to a bunch of guys who apparently use silicone a lot more than I do. So check that out. It could be a really simple solution. I haven't ever tried it. I just know the photo flow works like a dream. But that's a pretty cool option to use if it works. So you can see I just smashed that back, and I have a nice thick coat over my eyes, so my eyes are really well protected. Clean up the underside so that it's not going to interfere with my dropper jig system here. And this is what I was talking about on the bulkhead, about how I don't like this super clean, thick silicone edge, right? And just real quick, I have a thick mount right there that I just want to get rid of real quick. Just re-smash that so it looks cleaner. But what I'll do is I'll wipe all that photo flow off my fingers. So my fingers are not sticky, it's completely dry. And I can take that little edge right there and bleed that into my collar so it's perfectly seamless and you can't see, you know, a big thick goopy layer of silicone. But it all just fades into my collar here. And that is how you do a silicone jerk head. Now before we come and put our dropper jig system, I'm going to let this cure up. So I won't put that dropper jig on for 24 hours. You could do it sooner. You could probably do it after, 30 minutes or an hour or two after this is set up. But it takes 24 hours to cure. So come back and put the dropper jig on that. Bonus tip. So check this out. Let's say you were fishing a section of river and you were running just 2 beads, and that's kind of what you like. That's what I like for fishing on a Sink 3. And let's say I run into a really deep hole, deep run situation, and I want to just probe the depths. I want to get down, I want to see what's going on. You can take, and this is a massive piece of split shot, I wouldn't use something this big, but you can take removable split shot, and you can actually just take it, put it onto your dropper jig, clamp it closed, and you'd be able to, obviously that's kind of slightly ridiculous looking, use a smaller piece of split shot. But for demonstration purposes, you could totally put a piece of split shot on this, get down, dredge a super deep hole, figure out what's going on, and then when you're back to your normal fishing situation, you get back to your normal thin current, you take it off. So real quick, I want to share with you guys kind of just a few fishing situations and how I approached it. So to me, I'll share with you kind of things that might be intuitive first, but obviously you can swing it, right? It's a really easy way to get down and dirty and fish really slow and kind of a slow run and have this tick bottom and tick bottom and tick bottom and keep you hook up away from snagging on rocks or down timber or whatnot, and keep that fly kind of bouncing around. And every once in a while, you will get these weights to maybe get stuck on a rock, and you just roll cast over and pick it up, because nothing's ever hook driven home. It's just, a little tiny little bump or a grab or something, and it just flicks right out, right? And it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And so here's a situation where we had some just bad weather and the fish were weird and cold and didn't want to do anything, and I'm just fishing super slow, super deep, and sure enough, smallmouth, right? And so obviously I think a swing presentation is a pretty no-brainer, especially for getting deep in kind of a big slow
Dropper
run.
jig.
The second presentation, and this one's actually my favorite, and I wish I would have got the hook set on camera, but here you can see me casting, and I'm casting like 40 feet across stream and getting my fly to just skim the back edge of a boulder. And that fish, he was actually on the very back underside of that rock, and sure enough, I flicked that fly up in there, and he ate on the far backside. And that fish, he was kind of a brute, but my favorite thing with this system is that it jigs just enough that if I were to fish, because I fish a lot of big boulders, like 6 foot by 6 foot boulders. They're huge. And those boulders, are oftentimes actually undercut on the bottom, and the fish will come up and they'll hold under the bottom and the front pressure pocket and the back pressure pocket, like way up under all the curves. And so a lot of times I'll flick this fly right across the rock and let it jig down that back side of the rock. You flick it over, you throw a little mend in, and you let that fly literally contour the side, back side, every inch of that boulder that you can. Now that's kind of my favorite way to fish it. But when I first posted it, I had a whole bunch of people who assumed it was floating line only type territory, and sure, if you use 2 beads or 3 beads or 4 beads or whatever, you can fish it on a floating line and get pretty deep, but I fish this on a Sink 3 with the 2 beads all the time. You could fish 2 beads on a Sink 6 and get pretty deep. You could fish 3 beads and get really deep, pretty quick, right? Like it's just supposed to invert the fly. That's just it. And so the last situation is you just fish it normal. Like you just cast it out, bang the bank, and strip the fly on a sinking line. You just have a hookup presentation. And like this fish, it's kind of just in like a 2-foot deep run, and there's a little depression there, and it always holds fish. And sure enough, I flicked that up there and stripped the fly, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. Boom, he ate it. And he was a brute. He was a tank, right? And, you know, there's no reason why you can't just jerk, you know, it's almost like a swim bait. It's just a hook up presentation. And so, obviously, you can swing it over a deep run. My favorite thing is flicking it on the backside and the undercuts of boulders, because it does jig down enough where a weightless hook down presentation, I have no hope of even those fish seeing that fly on a 5-foot boulder. But this fly can get down on that backside, drop down 2 feet, and get a reactionary bite out of a smallmouth holding on the far outside of a boulder that I had no hope of presenting to aside from this. And I have a big profiled, wide-bodied fish. I don't have some low-profile clouser. I have a big meal here that's still hook point up and still jigging properly. Like, it's pretty cool. But you can also just fish it like a swim bait. Fish it like any hookup presentation, still banging the bank, still jerk stripping it. And I don't know, it's extremely versatile. I don't know what else to tell you. The ability to adjust the weight from 1 bead to 2 bead to 3 bead to 4 bead, adjust the length of this relative to your weight. The ability, if you wanted to use really small tungsten beads, you could just take 1 strand and knot it instead of taking 2 strands. You want to use larger beads, you use 2 strands. You want to use a really big bead, knot this, put a small bead and then a big bead. You have all these different options, and you just make it long enough to guarantee that it keels. Like, I think it's the coolest thing. So if you haven't yet, make sure you check out the Chosen One, all the tutorials. There's a whole bunch of them. But stop by, pick up the natural perch kit. It's pretty wicked cool color combo. And the jig kits as well. The Arex hooks, I throw in a bunch of mono for free, and the 2 packs of tungsten beads so you can use them all up. So check it out. Thanks, guys. See ya.